Hello, everybody. Welcome again to that word chat. Wonderful to see everybody in the room. Nice on a beautiful summer day that you decided to come along and join us here. It's kind of warm here. Normally sometimes I wear a jacket, sometimes I wear a bow tie, and it gets really hot. My office is upstairs and probably don't have enough insulation, and so it gets quite warm. So today I'm going more with the tropical theme. Our guest is in Tucson, and I noticed when she came in she had a sweater, so we'll have to ask her about it's probably just the same temperature there, I'm guessing. But this is Megan Figueroa. I told her I mispronounced it because I overthink it. But she is a linguist and a scientist from Tucson, Arizona, and she's the co-host of the Vocal Fries podcast, which is a lot of fun with Carrie Gillen. And it's about the ways we discriminate based on language, and so that's a nice topic for us here, something we've touched on before. So welcome, Megan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Nice to see you. Mm-hmm.
I'm wearing a sweater because it's super air conditioned in here because we have we don't have nice summer days. We have hot summer days. So
I
yeah.
See. So it's just Are you at home or you're in your office?
I'm at home, and actually we're in the middle of like monsoon season. So we had a beautiful rain monsoon storm last night. So it was actually a nice summer night. But yeah, now it's just hot. So.
Okay. All right. Well, it's quite hot here, and I'm not used to it in Columbus, Ohio. So Vocal Fries is, let me adjust. I'm a little crooked here. There we go. Vocal Fries, you've been doing this, we were just talking before, and this is like nearly 100 episodes. Do you know where you're at now?
I think we've passed, or I think it's 89 or 90, around there. Yeah.
90-ish,
it's getting close. In 4 years.
Yeah, 4 years. Congratulations. That's wonderful. And do you have big plans for the 100th episode?
Well, now that you ask, I think that we should, but we haven't thought about it.
All right. If people
we'll
have ideas.
We'll have to tweet out. Yeah, we'll have to tweet out and ask people for some ideas.
Yeah, well, I mean, our people in this room can say in the chat.
Absolutely.
Offer ideas. What should the Vocal Fries do for the 100th anniversary show? So let's go back to the beginning. How did it get started? So let me just say, and I'm going to not talk so much. I'll let you talk more. But it's really a delight to listen to the podcast because you guys have this great chemistry, and it's like sitting there listening to a conversation of two people. Sometimes you get very passionate about the stuff you're talking about for good reason. Very very indignant at times, but you have this great back and forth, and you laugh a lot, and it's just fun to listen to. So, were you guys friends before this? How did you get together? How did you start the podcast?
Yeah, so Carrie and I are best friends, and she was actually my professor when I was an undergrad at Arizona State University. But after I graduated, we became friends, and we talked about this type of stuff all the time over, drinks or over dinner or anywhere. So I think that it was just a natural pairing. But it was Carrie's idea to do the podcast, and she loves podcasts. and she thinks that they're a lot more fun when you can kind of go back and forth with someone. So she asked me, because again, we talk about this stuff all the time. We're very good friends. We are like foils to each other. Like, I'm the person who uses a bunch of exclamation points in emails, and she always uses periods. So that's how I would describe the kind of difference between her and I. She's the one that's a little bit more cynical, whereas I'm still surprised by things. So I think that comes out in the podcast a lot, where she's kind of like, yeah, Megan, of course. And I'm like, oh, does it really have to be this way? So I like that kind of dynamic between us.
And how did you get started doing what was the motivation to do a podcast on linguistic discrimination?
Yeah, so Carrie actually did one of the local, I guess it's TEDx talks in Chandler, Arizona, and she did it on basically, when you judge people by their grammar, you are actually discriminated against them, and it's classist and it's racist kind of thing. And she really kind of enjoyed that experience. She wasn't in academia anymore, and she really still wanted to be able to talk about linguistics and to teach, or, what we do is kind of learn from people. So learning with everyone on the podcast kind of thing. And her husband was just like, why don't you start a podcast? Because they're big podcast fans. Like, they were there, at Serial. I came to Serial late, but I feel like Serial is the podcast that started a lot of people. And she asked me because, we talk about this stuff all the time. I was finishing my dissertation, and I was like, yes, I should absolutely add something else to do. but I'm really glad that I did. And it's definitely, we've grown a lot since then, but I think it's a lot more fun now that I'm not writing my dissertation, and that I'm more used to podcasting, because it was terrifying in the beginning. You're putting your voice out there for everyone,
right?
Forever, basically.
Right. And part of it, you called it vocal fries because of the vocal fry, right? Is this like,
yes.
Do you get nasty comments about, even though the name of it is and the point of it is
right,
that they're, yeah. Let's talk about vocal fry.
Yeah.
I've heard the first episode, and and I think it's been something that I remember people talking about a lot, maybe 5 years ago or more. Like when you started it, I don't hear a lot about it now. I don't know why. Yeah. Maybe it's not as common. I don't know. But what is vocal fry?
So it is basically like, so we could talk at our, me and you are talking right now, like a normal sound, I don't know. But we could whisper, right? We could also whisper. And so vocal fry is just another way to use our voice. It's deeper. It's kind of crackly. That's what the fry comes in. It's actually called creaky voice by linguists. If you read the literature, it's creaky voice. And it's not dying down. I think that people are kind of getting it now, that vocal fry is not something to disparage the way that we have been. And actually, I still see a ton of comments on other podcasts about women and vocal fry, but we don't get that because we're specifically, like we talked about it so many times, but we do get a ton of comments about how, I think there's trolls, but they call us like social justice warriors. And so we get that kind of trolling comments, but we don't get comments about our voice.
Right. And you say social justice warriors is a bad thing?
No, they think it is. Yeah. They see, we even call it, right. We get called snowflakes.
I think it's a badge of honor, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what we get, but they get pretty nasty. But we kind of expected that. I've seen podcast reviews before. They can be very nasty, especially for women.
Sure.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, different standard. Yeah. Yep. The real reason I had you on the show today is because our goal is to get that word chat as a podcast. We didn't start as a podcast. People call us a podcast. And you can actually get a couple of episodes on Podbeam, but we haven't really that's our next thing, to move all these into podcast episodes that you can listen to. People have asked for this. They say we don't want to watch it on YouTube. We want to download it and listen to it on our walk. So that's our next. So what advice do you have for us?
Oh, enjoy it, because then you don't have to look good.
Well, we're still going to do the video.
Okay.
I still have to look good.
Yeah, no, it's nice that we don't have to, it's our voice. Makes it much easier. But I think that, with Carrie, it's, having someone else there, it's nice because, I think one time we were talking and I asked her to describe my face for the listeners because I was so horrified. I was like, describe what I'm doing right now. But you just have to remember that people that are listening in that way can't see you. So if you're doing something that really, I don't know, maybe you're doing something with your hands to explain something, they won't be able to see that.
Oh, yeah. I do this all the time. Yeah. So she's in Canada now, right? Has this been... So has that been a challenge to do the long distance thing, or?
No, because I've been living in Tucson. We met in Phoenix. She's been in Phoenix. So we've been Zoom or Skyping to do the podcast since the beginning. So this is old hat for us. It's actually gotten nicer because now our guests are all used to doing the thing. So before we'd have to send instructions, but now everyone knows. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true for us too. It seems like the guests are more apt to, be ready to go. Like we ask people to come in and for sound and lighting beforehand, and this is never really an issue. So so what did you expect? Did you have expectations when you started 4 years ago? Did you have a plan that it would continue on?
I think we hoped it would, because the topic is something that could go on forever, honestly. I mean, we haven't even gotten to Asian languages, unfortunately. There are just huge gaps in what we've covered. That's just one example. And then there's so many topics. Like our latest one, we talked about how we talk about fatness and how we talk about diet culture and what's unhealthy. And so it's we never thought that would be a topic that we would discuss. Of course, these are things Carrie and I would talk about personally, but it's of course this is relevant. It's still language and it's still used to oppress people. So it's relevant to our podcast. So the topics are there. I think we could go on for a long time if we wanted to. I think we hoped that it would gain traction. And I think we feel very lucky that it did, because, we're not the most popular podcast, I think, because we're doing great. But I think that there are other more popular podcasts because, they don't make you uncomfortable. And I think our show makes people uncomfortable. And it's, I think that's kind of part of talking about linguistic discrimination, is that it might make you uncomfortable because you're probably doing it just like I'm doing it. And just like I have to learn from our list or from our guests. So it's like you said, I think it's fun, and Carrie and I love talking to each other, and I'm glad that comes across. And I think we have amazing guests, but sometimes it does get serious and it can make people uncomfortable. But saying that, I'm really glad that we're going on for a year. We're in our fourth year, and that I think, we still have a long way to go. Right.
Well, and making people uncomfortable is good. That's another badge of honor, I think.
Right.
And you're right. I listened to the episode about weight and just the use of the word fat, which is I know it's reclaimed, or it's simply always. We don't have language to. You could call somebody voluptuous, I guess. But we don't have language that responds to it in anything but a negative way. And of course, as you point out in the show, it's the focus is on women, especially that that this is somehow an indicator of their value or their worth, and it makes me uncomfortable because I admit prejudice and and lack of awareness of things. And in terms of language, there's probably language that I use that I don't think about that is maybe harmful. So yeah, so keep doing it.
That's what the podcast is for, because we're doing so many things that we don't realize. I was interviewed for the New York Times about like language that I have gotten rid of. And I talked about how I got rid of the word lame because it's ableist, and how I was so horrified when someone approached me about it and said, like, you know, that this is really hurtful to a lot of people. And this was like 15 years ago, and I haven't used it since. And it just feels like some words are very hard to get rid of because we use them all the time. But it feels like, to me, it's worth trying. In my language, it's worth trying because it's a kindness to another person, even if it just makes one more person more comfortable. I'm happy to do it. So
you've been doing it for 4 years. We haven't really even started our podcast yet, but we'll hope to do it for 4 years. But Mignon Fogarty has been tweeting about doing this for 15 years now, the Grammar Girl podcast, and she's I think she's joined us today. I don't know if she's free to come on camera and say hi, or if she's hiding. We'll give her a few
Congratulations, that's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, she's hiding. Haven't showered. She said, "Oh, come on." She hasn't.
See, this is why podcasting is great.
Yes, exactly.
You never have to show your face.
Exactly. All right. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Mignon, but it's been. But congratulations on 15 years and inspiring, so many others to get into that area. So I wanted to ask you about your favorite podcast, but since we're talking about things that make you uncomfortable, was there, do you recall some podcasts where you felt like, oh my God, this is me, I've been doing this and I didn't realize, and you felt uncomfortable yourself?
You mean particular episodes of the Vocal Fries?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should, episodes of your podcast.
Yeah.
We could talk about other people's podcasts.
No, it's
diss them, but...
one of the ones that I talk about a lot that made me it was like a paradigm shift for me, is when we talked about New Orleans and how French there is disparaged. And this was something that was completely revelatory for me, because growing up in the Southwest, I thought French was a fancy language, and I thought that sophisticated people spoke French. Here, if a language is disparaged, it's Spanish, and so I thought that was the normal, quote unquote, normal language disparaged. But then I, of course, realized that it's contextual. Like, what's the context? The discriminatory acts in New Orleans are going to look different than they do in Tucson, Arizona, because it's a different place and it's populated with different people. So for me, that made me uncomfortable, because I was like, wow, that seems so obvious to me now. And I think that's, the type of discomfort that there's the discomfort where you're like, oh crap, I'm a jerk. But then there's the discomfort where it's like, I should have known better. Am I not paying attention? And I think both of those are very uncomfortable. And that's the one that really shook me. It's like, well, of course, it's all, context. That's the one that comes to mind immediately.
Okay. And let's talk more about favorite episodes. Is there, you mentioned a couple to me beforehand.
Yes. I love our first episode of this year with Corey Stamper. Corey's amazing. We got to talk about swearing and the history of swear words, which she's in, which is on Netflix, and it's amazing. So that was just a lot of fun to record. And our podcast is E for explicit because I usually accidentally say the F word at least once. So,
accidentally, at least once.
I'm not dropping a hammer on my toe, but I'm certainly saying it. And
yes.
And so that was fun, and I really like this year. I feel like we've really grown. I really like we did another episode like in February or March with Jaya Saxana, and she's a food writer, and we just talked about the way we talk about food. And then, of course, the latest one where we talk about the word unhealthy and fat. I really like that we're going into areas where people might not think about linguistic discrimination. Like, it's obvious in some areas, like what's an episode that we did that's more obvious related to so we did an episode about New Jersey. And so I feel like, there are some people have stereotypes about what people from New Jersey sound like. And that seems obvious. Like, okay, that's definitely related to language. But to talk to a food writer or to talk to the co-host of a podcast about diet culture and all of that, I think it's a little less obvious. And I really like that we're doing that.
Yeah, right. What's coming up? Do you have some? I mean, you mentioned Asian English, which you're right, is got to be a huge area.
Yeah.
And I should say that I'm an editor, so I focus on words. And there are myriad ways that people discriminate based on written language as well as spoken language. You don't hear the accents, and people tend to write to conform, but there are plenty of ways that there are language, there are choices people make in writing that disparage or discriminate or make people uncomfortable. So I'm sorry. So what's else is coming up? Are you planned out like a couple of months? Do you have a wish list?
Oh, there's definitely a wish list. But we do have an episode coming up with Emily Brewer about just ethics and artificial intelligence and language processing or
really?
Language tech. So that's really exciting because she's wonderful.
Emily Brewster?
Brewer.
Or Brewer.
Okay. Emily M. Brewer.
I'm sorry. See, this is the thing. I was thinking Emily Brewster.
That's an editor
at Merriam-Webster. Yeah. I thought, wow, that's that's a departure for her. Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, we have talked to lexicographers. We've talked to Jane Solomon. I know there's more that I'm not thinking of right now. But we have lexicographers are good to talk to, of course, because words are great. But so that one's coming up, and that's exciting because it's super relevant. And I think thinking about the bias that's in our technology and in our algorithms is really important for all of us. Just thinking about how like Twitter got rid of the algorithm that crops the photos because it was racist. So, it would crop the, Black person out and when it centered it, it would put the white face in the center. So
really?
they got rid of it.
I didn't know this.
Yeah.
Well, why would they even have it? I mean, so there's was it an error because they were like looking for the most bright, clear person, or?
That's funny.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying, why would you have an algorithm that would put the white person center?
I mean, it's just the feedback that computers get from us are going to be racially biased because we're racially biased. And Twitter wanted an algorithm that kind of centered the photo because otherwise you go through the feed and it's cropped and you can't see what it is. So they got rid of it and they like made a statement about it. And these are things that are, of course, happening with the language bits too. And I mean, we've all tried to talk to Alexa or Siri and they didn't hear us quite right, perhaps. I mean, they train more on men. They certainly aren't don't have as much training on like Spanish accent English. So my last name sometimes, if it doesn't get picked up right. So yeah, it's all of these things that we have to think about that are going into like our everyday devices, and how we walk through the world is being influenced by these biases, these language biases, and other racial biases and class biases and all of that. So that's a really good episode. I wished we could talk to everyone. That's why if you have a topic that you want to see addressed, there's probably some way to talk about language. We really, our like dream thing is there's another podcast called You're Wrong About, that dissects like historical events or major events and kind of tells you what you probably didn't know about it and what you got wrong about it. And we really want to do like a crossover podcast episode with them because it's such an amazing podcast. And it's always fun to talk to other podcasters. But yeah. We're open.
Yeah. So if anybody in the room has a suggestion on something that maybe, I'm sure there are some things that we would both say, and I really thought of that as a topic for an issue in terms of linguistic discrimination. If anybody has any ideas, throw them out there. And I'm gonna. I'm basically. I go through the vocal fries list and say, oh, this would be a good person to have on that word chat. So I've got no qualms about stealing all those people.
Well, and one of my other favorite episodes, again, is because we went kind of outside the box. We talked to a former Arizona poet laureate, Alberto Rios, and he talks about growing up in the U.S. or the Arizona-Mexico borderlands and being punished for speaking Spanish as a child in public school. And I really enjoy is not the right word. It's that I really cherish that talk because that happened to my dad in the borderlands. So I think it was nice to have that episode because a lot of people didn't realize that happened, and that in some ways it's still happening to kids who don't speak English when they come into school, and how they're treated. And it's not always intentionally cruel. It's these things that we think are helpful that are actually not, unfortunately.
Right. It's conforming to an idea about what is correct.
Yeah.
Which might not be. Yeah. So you're, do you speak Spanish as a native speaker? Or?
I don't, and that's why I got into linguistics, because I think about it so often about why my dad didn't teach me Spanish and what kind of goes into that decision, and looking more into it, realizing that a lot of pediatricians at the time told parents, don't do it, you will confuse the child. So I basically wanted to know more about how children learn language, because that didn't feel right to me. And this is what we've been telling parents for a long time. And in some ways, that message still gets conveyed to them in doctors' offices and in schools.
It seems like Arizona's been a hotbed of, at the state legislature level of trying to legislate English only.
Oh, yeah.
And, what goes on in the schools. Where are we right now? What's the current
status? It's racist, but, I currently on the books, it's, bilingual education is not something that you can do in Arizona unless you get forms that override this. It's a complicated process if you want your kid to be in bilingual school. I think the law says something like you must teach English in English. So basically cutting out bilingual education. We had something a while back where they tried to legislate accent, we all have accents, but teachers, and if they have a quote unquote heavy accent. So yeah, there are some very troubling and downright racist, legislation that's trying to be pushed. And of course, we're not the only place. California deals with it too, even though it's like this liberal haven. But there's a lot of Spanish speakers. There's a lot of children that are learning English. So it's not the greatest place to be a kid learning another language, I'd say. That's where we're at.
And I didn't see the New Orleans episode of it. Is that true there too, or is that, because I'm not familiar with the, I know there's a very French New Orleans accent that
right, the Creole, like a Cajun Creole. It's, I don't know about the school system there, but I would definitely guess so. Certainly, even just in informal situations, it's quite disparaged. And of course, this has nothing, I mean, ultimately, it doesn't have to do with the language. It has to do with the people and how we feel about them. It's a proxy. And so I'm sure there are similar situations across the U.S. That aren't Spanish specifically. And
I think you sort of alluded to this, that, I mean, it is not always, there's a racist overtone. Sometimes not an overtone. I mean, just plain racist.
Right.
We don't like to hear people speaking differently than we do.
Right.
But there's also sort of, isn't there also this well-meaning, you know, if we could just get them to speak white, then everything would be great.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's absolutely intentional and unintentional racial things going on here. And it seems like, I think that we have this idea that, kids will meet their quote unquote full potential if they, just assimilated quicker. And, English is the language of survival in this country and of success. And, I think that is what happened to me, is that my dad wanted me to be very successful, and English was the ticket. So why confuse me with another language? And so, I mean, that's well-meaning. I think that, teachers too may tell kids to stop speaking Spanish in a classroom because they just want the kids to practice English because it's a good opportunity to practice, and that doesn't necessarily have to be hateful. There's absolutely, these more covert situations that aren't necessarily like nefarious. But that's what the podcast is about. I mean, it's just like pointing out these things. We're learning with you. It's kind of like a call in and not a call out, where it's like, I used to do this too. I used to be really proud of the fact that I know the difference between 2, 2, and 2. That was like a badge of honor for me, for a very long time. I was proud that I was so good at writing the standardized way. And then I was like, oh, but I had access to, public school that taught me, and, I had, didn't have any sort of disability that made it harder for me to learn to write. And I was able, there are reasons why 2, 2, and 2, that was easy for me, and yay. And then realizing that some people don't know the difference for many reasons, and that it could be cruel to actually point that out.
So I mean, so social economic status, and the ability to go to kindergarten, to go to pre-K, just to get that sort of training. I mean, that is different it's across the spectrum, and there's
I mean, it's structural. We know that schools get funded better if they're surrounded by upper middle class or rich people, because it's funded by taxes. So there are these structural components that affect whether you get a good education, quote unquote good, because really everyone speaks great, like, or science great. It's not about, they're not doing language bad. It's just that we have the standardized way that we are saying that you should write, and there are three different twos. That has nothing to do with whether they're a good communicator. It has everything to do with what we learn in school and what has been standardized. And that's just something I didn't know until I became a linguist, or I started studying these things and thinking about these things.
Right, right. Yeah, and I just lost my train of thought. I was going to say that stays with somebody that has, I mean, the discrimination, there's some very, ingrained stuff that you just can't change about the way we judge people, and that's in writing their cover letter that they send us with a job application and things like that. Yeah,
that's why we want more holistic approaches to hiring, to accepting people into graduate programs, into anything. Because if we just rely on things like cover letters, then, are we good? We're gonna, some of us consciously, some of us unconsciously, are gonna judge the grammar and think that this person doesn't have as much to offer because of grammar, and that's not necessarily true. So it's rough. I actually taught English at a community college, and it was really hard for me to teach like commas and all of this while, also saying this, I don't want to change you. I want to add another tool to your toolkit. Like, this is what I'm, like, the best that I can do in talking about this, because there's nothing wrong with your language. I'm just trying to teach you a new skill that in no way is going to place any value on how you speak or sign. And I want you to know that. So, I think that, I'm not like the first one to say this or do this. I just think it's really important that we acknowledge these things so that people don't internalize it, because people internalize these type of things.
Yeah. So, I try not to be too political on the show, but you started 4 years ago, which means, you had this miserable time of so how have things changed in your outlook on the show? I say this because I listened to an old episode, and you both sounded so depressed.
Oh yeah, it's really hard. We do. So I think one of the ways that we connect with people and to make us more real, because again, we want to like call in people and be like, learn with us instead of calling out and acting as if we're authorities, is to have this at the top of the show. We talk to each other and catch up, and even listening. So we were very depressed after the 2016 election. During COVID too, you can hear us talking, and it just sounds really, really sad. We actually even have an episode about toxic masculinity and the language that we use to talk about Donald Trump and the language he uses. So there was an episode on that specifically. And we've talked about COVID too. So we had someone talk about medical translation. So we've actually tackled them in the show with guests. And so I think we really just wanted to use it as a, we might as well, talk about this. And not hide the fact that we're like struggling, because, Carrie was in the US at that point too. But I think that it'll be weird in 10 years to go back and listen and be like, oh, that was, I was depressed. And like,
well, honestly, that's my reaction. I listened to this episode, and it was like Trump and I think it was the beginning of COVID, I think probably. And it just, and it felt like I had gone back to this place, It isn't quite as, it's a little bit brighter, more optimistic now, but it's still, the problems, the issues you're talking about all are relevant and all remain. Right?
They do remain, yes, but I think that our mental health, picked up. I mean, I think in the latest episode, well, it was my birthday too, so Carrie tells me happy birthday. So it was like a festive thing, but I think we're much happier in the later in this year's episodes, even though we were still like, I got my COVID vaccine in like February, so like I probably talked about that. It's just like this strange time capsule. But the meat of the episode with the guest, I think, will be relevant for a very, very long time. Unfortunately, in some ways, because I think that linguistic discrimination is kind of this like final frontier where even social justice warrior snowflakes like me, like the trolls call me, are still linguistically discriminating against people because it doesn't seem as bad as it doesn't seem like it's discrimination, because it's like, I think we think it's like this mutable thing, like people could change it if they wanted to. Like this is not something that's like part of them, like their skin color is, or their ethnicity or whatever. But that's not true. All the way that we speak is tied to those things, and so yes, it absolutely is harmful. And I think more people are realizing that, I hope. Yeah.
We like to have our guests in the room ask questions. So if anybody has a question for Megan about
I saw
anything.
Something. My earrings are UFOs, and the UFO is like, what do you call it? Taking a cow. What is the
really?
word? Yeah. Someone asked if they were zipper pulls. Beaming up a cow. So that's what my earrings are, and I love them.
Okay.
I just got them, so thank you for noticing. And then vocal fry is lower pitch. It's not higher. I think maybe you're thinking of like the Kardashians, which is they're always pointed to as like the example of vocal fry, but they also do like up talk, where it sounds like you're always asking a question. I think they do some baby talk too, so maybe that's what this person was thinking of with like a higher pitch. But they do like a confluence of things, and it's not just vocal fry. But vocal fry, and if someone asked for example, I speak very much with vocal fry. You could kind of hear it at the end of my sentence if you can hear it. It's the creaky thing at the end there. I can't show you any other way because I don't know how not to vocal fry. But yes, it's lower. And I think a lot of people think of it as like the California Valley Girl thing, which is separate things that make up this stereotypical Valley Girl.
Right. And I think, and I remember in the, it was the first episode, you talked about men do it demonstrably more than women. Is that, but because it's just something we associate with women speak.
I think that the numbers are saying that, I'm thinking of like, because like is another thing that we associate with women. Fillers, like and but there's really no evidence to say that women do it much more. But, I think that, of course, we're limited in what we can do with like statistical methods and looking at this type of stuff, but there's no real reason to believe that women do it more. It's just that we find women more grating because discrimination and these toxic ideas that we have about women. Yeah, Ira Glass does it. Someone pointed out that Ira Glass does it. Yeah. Sure.
Right. And somebody else early on in the room asked about the Wonder Woman poster.
She's wearing like curlers. That's done by I believe a Dominican artist in New York City, and I also have Daria wearing rollers as well on the other side. So it's the same artist. I think his last name is Peralta. But I really love those. And Wonder Woman, Linda Carter, is also half Mexican like I am. So
I did not know that. Interesting. So if anybody has any other questions, just put query in and ask, and we'll call on you and get you to answer in the room. So you're half Mexican. Did I read your fourth generation American? Does it go back that far?
Third American, okay. But like as far as records can tell, I'm sixth generation Sonoran. So I've been in the Sonoran Desert for 6 generations, but that also means that across the border, So like great grandparents were born in Sonora, Mexico. And yeah, and then I was born in the Sonoran Desert on Arizona side. And yeah, so third generation American, at least sixth generation born in the Sonoran Desert, which means I get cold easily. So you'll see me in a knitted cardigan during the summer. I think, yeah, someone pointed out it's Tony Peralta. Thank you so much. The artwork.
You did an interview somewhere, I'm forgetting where, about Latino and Latinx. And I wanted to ask you about that. That's kind of a that's something that I've seen more of. Is Latinx?
I say Latinx, so Latinx, but that's like pronouncing it with the Spanish vowels. But Latinx is also, I've heard. Yeah. Right.
So and we've talked about this a little bit. Heather Bonikowski from dictionary.com was on an episode, and we talked about that. And it's something I'm seeing a lot more of, and we're finally getting into the written side of it, and it seems very useful, but it's also very new, and it's not universally received. So where are we with that as a gender neutral version of Latino, Latina?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's relevant to editing too, because the reason why I was on KJZZ, which is our Phoenix NPR affiliate, was the host was basically like, we're journalists and we don't know which word to use. And so absolutely, I can see this being an issue for a lot of people, not just people in the Latinx community. But actually it's not old, like it's from Old English or Old Spanish or something, but it's been around for at least a decade, and people, activists in Central America, have been using it to be gender inclusive. So I think what's happening is that just mainstream, in the 2020 election, many of the, at least Democratic candidates, were using Latinx in their materials to reach out to the community. I've been seeing it in more like nonprofits and more like institutions are using it. And I think that's just because of social media is helping to spread it now in a different way. So it's older than we think, but it feels new because of social media. And I think it certainly feels new because, if we were to believe the polling, older, people, my dad's generation are polled, and not necessarily him, but they say that they've never heard of it or they don't use it. And so people are really running with that. And I think that that's, again, one of those things where it's not necessarily intentionally harmful. I think people are like, well, see, most Latinx people don't like it. But the thing I think is that so many people say they aren't using it, and that is just like saying how a lot of people don't use they them pronouns. That's okay, but that doesn't mean that it's not a thing that people use. So I consider myself Latina, but I'm happy to be called Latinx. That's fine, but I identify as Latina. And so if someone asked me, do you use Latinx? I'd say, well, it depends on what question are you really asking. Ultimately, I'm Latina, but I'm okay with Latinx. So I think a lot of people don't use it, just as they don't use gender neutral pronouns in English, or if they're not in the Latinx community. So those numbers are misleading, and I think ultimately, I talked about it earlier, just when I got rid of the ableist language that I've used like 15 years ago, it's Latinx or Latine, so ending it with an E, is also becoming more popular now. To do that is just a kindness to people that are asking, to not be placed in gender binary, or saying that I can't identify with this. And I think it's a kindness that I'm happy to do, because these are people that are extremely marginalized in our Latinx community, in the broader community. And it's just, it's just kind of a way that I can use my privilege, even though I'm, Latina and don't necessarily identify as Latinx, but I'm happy to be called it. It's not for me, it's for people that, are asking. It's just the kindness to say, yes, right. I will do this for you, or for everyone, for myself.
Yeah, which is, so much of language we want to, and I think editors do this to a large extent, is we want to try to keep things as understandable, and which means don't change anything, which means, keep everything the way it is. But the reality is that things do change, and I think, the greater awareness of the non-binary, the non-binary there has gained a lot of usage in recent years, and it just seems the thing with Latinx is it's so obvious by looking at it what it's doing. I don't think it's confusing too many people. When it's used. So,
I think there are actually a lot of people that, I'm saying this as part of the community, a lot of Latinx people that are being intentionally cruel by not using or saying that they won't use it. It doesn't mean you have to identify with it, and it's not diminishing who you are at all. In fact, we have been diminishing so many people's identities for so long because we have, just the racist and classist and transphobic and all of these things, that ideals that make up our society. So it's, us more privileged people are not being diminished in any way. In fact, we are using our privilege for a slight good, like you're really not putting yourself out that much. And yes, it's hard. It might be hard for a lot of people to make the switch to gender, the they, them. And that's okay. That's totally okay. You'll make mistakes, and that's also okay. It's the effort and acknowledging that it's just like respecting someone's human dignity. And I see someone asking about the @ for like Latina. The reason why it's moved from that is that the @ implied a gender binary. So it was a way to be an A and an O. But again, that's still binary. So that's why it's moved on from that.
The A combines the A and the O, so it's a shorthand for Latino. And I generally, beyond I've always said, we're not spending money on ink. It's okay to say Latino and Latina without compressing, but then that doesn't take into account those that people who don't identify one way or another. And like you say, and you have a simple message that you end every show with that applies here.
It's don't be an asshole. And I think that's ultimately the message here. Yeah, absolutely.
It's no harm to be thoughtful. And I've always felt that language is meant to communicate, and that and I kind of push back a little bit on people who say, well, whatever somebody wants as an individual is what you should go with. I think to some extent that's true, but you have to communicate. If it's confusing the message, you have to step back and explain what you're doing in terms of language. But that being said, it's pretty easy to be accommodating to how people identify, and the language people like to use in when referring to themselves. So I kind of brushed over. I wanted to ask you about your current position. Your background is in language acquisition, and what's your job now?
I'm currently a research scientist in a child language development lab. It's actually the lab where I got my PhD and did my dissertation work. So, I'm just interested. Like I said earlier, I was interested in why we have this idea that more than one language would be confusing to children, and I wanted to learn all I could about child language development. And I think actually there's a lot of stigmatizing or discriminatory things that we do when we talk about children developing language, actually. And, that's where we start internalizing messages is pretty young. So, I'm just interested in all things, what is happening with kids when they're learning language that we're not seeing. Perception is far in advance of production, whether that's spoken or sign. So what are they doing in perception? And, how is this related to, being neurodivergent or all of these things? Like, how are we, my new thing is, how are we potentially being ableist when we talk about these things? Another thing too is child language development researchers and linguists in general. We are so bad at recognizing sign as something that is worthy of study, and it's horrifying. So that's another thing that's like my new thing, where I'm just like, okay, the ableism is strong in this field. What is happening? In the way we talk about, children and all of this, it's not an easy topic. We don't know as much as we think we do because we're not considering a lot of factors. And I see someone asked about, like, if we'll ever do something about substance abuse disorders and how we talk about that. That is on my wish list.
Okay.
Yeah. I have a person in mind.
For can you explain the topic? What would the...
Yeah. So how do we talk about addiction? I've just read a book on the opioid crisis and talking about there's this word pseudo addiction, which is, from what I can tell, bullshit. But yet we make policy and we make pharmaceutical decisions based on the idea that there's something called pseudo addiction. And then I know there's this person that studies how people that have been in treatment for substance abuse disorders, how they refer to themselves, if they refer to themselves as an addict or not, and how that plays out in recidivism if they come back. So these type of things, the language that we use to call people an addict or whatever, how is that actually potentially oppressing them? Yeah. So that's what the angle would be on that one.
Yeah, interesting. Cool. All right. Well, we'll look forward to that. And we're just at our time, so I guess nothing left but to thank you and
thank you.
Appreciate this great conversation. Check out the vocal. Your website is the Vocal Pod, right?
Vocalfriespod.com.
Oh, Vocal Fries Pod. Okay. Is there a V in front of it?
No, there's not.
No.
I know.
Vocalfriespod.com. Okay. That's all right. No, it's, yeah. But most of your hashtags are...
You just Google it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's out there. Great great podcast. Lots of fun to listen to. And interesting and challenging. Really great. We've had... so we're gonna have another podcaster, Gretchen McCullough, is going to be here in 4 weeks. And interestingly, we've had this run ever since Lisa McClellan. Every guest we've had has been a PhD. So that's nice. I think it says something nice about our show. We value education. And next week's going to be interesting. We've got Ann Friedman, who's the founder, driving force behind the new Planet Word Museum in Washington, D.C. So 2 weeks from now. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think, and as we say, don't be an asshole.
Don't be an asshole.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.